Now we're going to start with our questions, and I'll begin. I've been thinking about this, you know, because we look in the Internet was founded in, I think, 1983. Section 230 came into play in 1996, I believe. And we've been discussing that ever since. Should we have done more? Should we have how do we come back and put guardrails on it? Is it gone too far? Who's accountable? Who's responsible? On and on and on. Now that we're coming into the age of the AI, each one of you, give me your thoughts on this comes into the realm, if you will, and we're going to be so dependent on it and using it for so many purposes. What could we do, learning from what we didn't do when the Internet came into play? Dr. Matheny?
Thanks, Senator Manchin. I think that the application of some of these large models to developing very capable cyber weapons, very capable biological weapons, disinformation campaigns at scale, pose grave risks. And I think one of the threats that I see is that the very technology that we develop in the United States for benign use can be stolen and misused by others. I think we need a licensing regime, a governance system of guardrails around the models that are being built, the amount of compute that's being used for those models, the trained models that in some cases are now being open sourced so that they can be misused by others. I think we need to prevent that. And I think we're going to need a regulatory approach that allows the government to say, tools above a certain size with a certain level of capability can't be freely shared around the world, including to our competitors, and need to have certain guarantees of security before they're deployed.
You know, my biggest fear is that what little bit I know about AI, but knowing the capability of AI, having people say something they never said, having the image of a person doing something they never did, having a country declaring war that never happened. All these things, I mean, the stakes are so high in what we're doing, but if we can learn from our mistakes and put those guardrails in now, and you all would know better of how you intend your program to be used or your platform to be used, to tell us what should be there to protect, not just to protect your market, if you will, but protect basically the use of this and the intentions of what it's for. I think we need to do that and think about this deeply before we go further. Dr. Sankar, Mr. Sankar.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what you're getting at is we kind of implicitly all believe or explicitly believe that AI is valuable, but how do you make it viable? It's not viable without trust. And that trust requires a real foundation where you understand the data that went into it, you understand why, to the extent you're not getting behaviors you expected, you're getting those behaviors. And so I think a big part of this approach is, I'd welcome a regulatory approach to this, is also realizing that there's a huge and outsized role for the department to lead by going through it. It's only by red teaming, adopting and red teaming, trying to break it, that we're going to really understand and develop the appropriate, rigorous testing and evaluation framework. I would say the analogy to cybersecurity is great here. You can't just have a blue team effort to protect yourself. You learn as much or more from red teaming it that defines how you defend yourself going forward. So I think these are actually two sides of the same coin, and we should be practicing them together and aggressively.
Dr. Osprey.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally agree, and I think that the analogy to the internet is really apt. If we've learned anything in the past several decades of technology innovation, we see a focus on functionality first. In the case of the internet, sharing information. In the case of AI, solving a broad range of applications. And then we think about security. And I think we can't make that mistake again. Today, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on cybersecurity, trying to shore up the problems that we had in the past that we didn't think about. We have an opportunity now to think about the security of these AI models as well. And there are two frontiers that I imagine we'll probably get into later in the discussion. But to preview, data poisoning is a huge problem. So the idea that the data you're using to train these models can be altered by a nefarious actor to create profound challenges with the AI algorithms. And the second is adversarial attacks. So you may have seen some of these sensational videos of putting a few dots on a stop sign and to a self-driving car, it looks like a green light. Or fingerprint readers with a couple of modifications spoofing, authentication. These are real problems, and we need to think clearly about shoring up those security vulnerabilities in our AI algorithms before we deploy these broadly and have to clean the mess up afterwards.
Well, let me just say thanks to all of you. Would it be possible, I think on behalf of Senator Rounds and myself and our subcommittee here, to ask you all to, as quickly as possible, 30, 60 days, you put a little team together, give us some thoughts on what you think can be and should be done. We can share them with the committee members here to see if we can basically start looking at how we would write legislation not to repeat the mistakes of the past. If you could do that, we'd appreciate it. Senator Rounds? Dr. Matheny. Thank you. Our hope today was to have witnesses from Scale AI present because of scheduling. They couldn't make it. To discuss their data management practices to ensure the data being fed into the AI algorithm is consumable. Just to put this into context for the public, private industry has to buy the majority of data they need to feed into their AIs. But DoD is in a unique position given the wealth of data we're collecting on a daily basis from every network node and physical sensors in all our equipment. The problem seems to be in owning that data and making sure it is all the same format for an AI to recognize and use. My question is this: is it fair to say that the data an AI interprets and learns from is arguably more important than algorithm itself?
I think it's all important. Sometimes the analogy is used of, three legs of a stool. You've got data, the algorithms, the compute, and then the floor is talent. That is something that's essential to all of those. So we need to invest in all four of those elements. I do think that data can be a place where the United States has an asymmetric advantage because of the amount of data that we collect from systems that have operated globally in a way that, say, China's systems or Russia's systems haven't. This is an observation that the Director of Net Assessment at DoD made, which I think is accurate. We simply collect more data from more platforms that are relevant to military operations than any other country. But we're not fully leveraging that. And we need to ensure, one, that we appropriately collect, store, align the data, place it in databases that can actually be leveraged. I think one of the things that was most striking about Project Maven was just how much work had to be done on data cleaning, alignment, getting networks to talk to each other. It was that stuff. It wasn't the sexy algorithm stuff that was the hard part. It was the elbow grease needed to just ensure that data was in the right place.
Any other comments from anybody else on the panel on that? Now, I'm going to have a follow-up to you. Here's a follow-up so you can think about this too. How would you summarize the Department of Defense's data management practices, and how could they be improved to make sure that every bit of data that we're collecting is available for our usage, not limited by silos between private contractors? That's kind of the follow-up to the first.
I'd like to build on the stool analogy there, and I'll get to your follow-up
Okay.
question. You have to, you can't make one leg of the stool long and tall first. That's not a very good stool. And so I would urge us to resist the temptation to say, first, we need the perfect data foundation, then we go on. Actually, it is, if we look at the Project Maven example there, it is the fact that we suddenly had the algorithms that pointed us to the fact that the data was garbage. So these things move together, and we have to simultaneously coordinate the investment and not slice these up into different responsibilities. And it is now the fact that we have these powerful large language models that's telling us that we actually don't have enough GPU capacity in the world. And so, I think the stool analogy is a very good one. Now, to your question here, I would say this idea that we are operational is profound. It is our advantage. We do things everywhere in the world. I would say we definitely collect more data, but we also throw away an enormous amount. Part of my experience has been every place we've shown up in a new operational context, there is data we could be collecting that in a prior generation of software was perceived to be useless because there was no operational decision you could have been making with that data. So it was often thrown on the ground. When new capabilities were introduced, the utility of that data became obvious on its face. And so this is a powerful feedback loop that really feeds into our American culture of innovation, solving problems at the edge with the capabilities we're providing. And I would say the data management efforts are great. There are definitely some policy opportunities that would make it world-class. So how do we all get on the same page here? I think we have to get the incentive structure right around how we share data. So a mandate that all data must be shared because it's actually the government's, I think is great in theory, but in practice, in order to enable all of the folks with various interests to do that, you need a data foundation that gives you true security. How am I labeling this data? How do I control who has access to it? How do I govern the purposes for which they're allowed to use this data? Once I develop trust in how we're governing access to this data platform within the Defense Department, now we can actually share this data.
That was a question we were asking on the front end. Do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Chairman. I completely agree with everything we said here. I would add, though, that while it is clear that we are the best in the world at collecting data, we've got some work to do on data architecture and access to that data. I still want to emphasize that we have a significant amount of work to do with the computers that don't look like computers, these weapon systems that we operate around the world. I'll tell you, when I was in uniform, it drove me absolutely crazy that we could operate an aircraft or a ground combat vehicle or a submarine in a combat environment and not, number one, be able to collect or own the data that came off of that platform. That is just a massive national security issue, and I think we need to get better at enabling these systems, these weapon systems, with the kinds of data collection to feed into this data architecture so that we can get the enterprise IT computer side as well as the weapon system side, and that's going to be our real advantage. And I'll just end with one comment here, which is increasingly, we had this conversation around cryptography when we were thinking about what can we put backdoors in the encryption, and there's a sense in which when these AI algorithms get out into the public domain, and there's academic papers and PhD theses that are written about these things, they're kind of cats out of the bag. And so, on some sense, we should continue to try to keep models guarded, but that's a time advantage. At some point, it's knowledge, and it's going to get out there. The real advantage, what we can control, is the data, that one leg of the stool that our adversaries won't have, and then we retain our leadership position in being able to employ these AI models.
Thank you all. We'll continue this, but now, Senator Rounds.
Thank you.